Hello and welcome to my channel. I managed to get my hand on the 20-year-old Doctor Who model kit, and this features a scene from the episode entitled Daleks in Manhattan, and it was manufactured by Airfix. This is no ordinary model kit. It contains lights and sounds, plus paint, brushes and glue. The latter three items were missing, although you can tell by the state of the box why, but the important thing is everything else appears to be there. The rear of the box helped tell a little bit of the story from the episode Daleks in Manhattan, and now that we've been brought up to speed, let's see what we get inside. We get quite a lot of plastic, and this kit is quite sizable. First, we'll just have a quick look through the paperwork. Airfix has its own club you can join, which comes with a host of benefits, plus there's a couple of amendments to the instructions, as well as some legal jargon. And lastly, we have the step-by-step instructions along with the colour guide. And at the end, it shows you an example of what this finished kit should look like. I may make some modifications along the way, but we shall see. I decided I'm going to build this kit in stages. And stage number 1 is going to be the diorama, with it being so big. As it will be nice to get it out of the way and save some space. I just need to go through all the pieces and remove them from the sprues. The plastic is quite thick and requires a little bit of clean-up, and I do that with both a hobby knife and a file, and it's worth taking your time at this stage so you don't come a cropper later on. All these pieces are too glossy to paint, so I'll rough up the surfaces with a sanding sponge. This means the paint has something to adhere to and is less likely to peel off. I'm just going to glue a few pieces together before I start painting. And that's the coils on the control panel and the ladder, although I'm not sure why Dalek needs a ladder, but it has one. Maybe it's for the pig slave to use, I don't know. I'd have to rewatch the episode to find out for sure. The rest of the assembly will have to wait until it's been primed, and I'm now going to prime everything in grey, followed by spray painting some parts in silver or gold. And for the panel with all the dials on it, I spray painted that copper, and then hand painted on some black accents. These are the bases for the light fittings. The outside get a coating of black paint, while the inside gets white, and this will hopefully represent the light. I'm using some brush-on superglue to attract the dome. You'd have to be careful when applying superglue to clear parts, as they have a tendency to fog up. But in this case, everything worked out fine. There is a grid on these lenses which need painting black. This is a bit of a tedious job to paint, but it needs to be done. I used a little bit of black panel liner to add some detail to some of the pieces, and this just helped to separate all that gold. There are 4 buttons on this panel which I paint orange. In the assembly instructions there are some pieces that can be cut out, and these will help add some detail to the instrument on the diorama. Water slide decal would have been much better, but I suppose these are better than nothing. Now I had the tedious task of cutting them all out. On this sheet we have 4 plasma balls and a total of 6 dials. Using PVA glue for paper items gives you the best control because it has a slow set time and it dries clear. And it's just a matter of putting the dials in place and making sure they're in alignment. And the same applies for the plasma spheres, although these thankfully have no real orientation. I find that a cotton bud is quite useful for pressing it all down. Because these dials haven't been cut perfectly round, I used a little bit of white paint to fill in the gaps. And while that's drying, I glue the spheres into place. And once again I managed to do this without fogging anything up. For the smaller dials they have no protective covering, so I'm going to create this by using some UV resin. I just add enough to cover each of the discs, being very careful not to overspill, and then the resin is cured with a UV torch. These discs are a little bit bland, so a few drops of panel liner will add some contrast. And now to glue everything together. Because everything's now painted, I can't risk using modelling cement, as it will interfere with the paint, so it's back to using good old-fashioned superglue. And thankfully most of these parts can only be assembled in one way, so it's just a matter of lining up the pegs. So just have a few more detail pieces to add before the big assembly. So the lights have now been added. So we just have the plasma spheres left to put into place. And now to assemble the large pieces, and these kind of need wrestling into place in order to get them into alignment and to stay there. So any problems you encounter at one side is naturally repeated on the other. But thankfully there aren't too many parts, so they go together pretty quickly. I've had to put glue on all the contact points on the ladder. If I didn't do this, it would hover a few millimetres off the ground. So I just need to push it to the ground for long enough for the glue to take hold. And that's the diorama part completed. And by getting this done first, it means I have a lot less plastic to fight through to build the Daleks. The Dalek heads are pre-assembled. They just need wires attaching to them for the sound and lights functions. I'll later remove these, but I'll explain why when I get to that point. I think it could be easier just to do one Dalek at a time. So I'm going to remove all the parts first and get them cleaned up. The only thing I'm going to leave alone for now are the Dalek balls. And that sounds so wrong. These are going to be the very last thing I paint up and add on. Here's the guide on how to assemble the Dalek. So we're starting from the torso and using modelling glue. You kind of have to get each section done in one go and then allow it time to set. That way you can still make adjustments to make sure it all fits. So that was the midsection, so now time to work on the head. There are 4 parts to build up the ring, and for some reason there are 2 extras, but I'll put them to one side. As it turned out, these wires were getting in the way, and I'll explain why I don't need them shortly. And with those removed, I can finish off the head and attach it to the body. And just to keep things simple, I've kept the post very basic. And I don't like the fact that the stalk and the lights are pre-attached. It means I have to mask them out when it comes to painting. And now I have to assemble the sockets for the plunger arm and the gun arm. Each side is basically a mirror image of the other. And once those are done, I can move on to assembling the arms. They're quite small and they're done in 2 halves, so just a matter of making sure they're in alignment before the glue sets. The plunger just plops on the end of that one. And the gun is made out of transparent plastic, but I'm not sure why, as I'm going to paint it silver. And those can basically be push fit into their allotted slots. In the background you can see all the remaining Dalek pieces, and for those of you who are quite eagle-eyed you might notice what's missing. A lot of these panels have a front side and a back side. This is so you can create a peg system so they can slot into each other. Now I'm supposed to assemble this onto the Dalek base. But guess what? I have no Dalek bases. I bought this kit very cheap and I was told there were parts missing. But after having a good look through, I could only tell that the paint, brush and glue was missing. But as it turns out, the bases are missing too. And that is where the battery box lives for the electronics. But I can live without the light and sound part. But I do need a base. This old toy Dalek is about the same size, so I'm going to try and copy the dimension to create my own bases. I'll first trace it onto a piece of paper, but making it slightly bigger than what it needs to be. And then I'll cut that out to create a template. And I'll trace that onto a 10mm thick PVC board. Then it's just a matter of cutting them down to size, double checking them along the way, making sure I haven't cut too much off. And once I've whittled them down to a pair of identical boards, I can start working on the shape. And I have to use my ruler at this point to make sure all the sides are symmetrical. Then it's just a matter of carefully cutting them out and making sure both bases are identical. And once they've all been cut out, I use a file to tape at the top part. And since I'm doing this by hand, I've got to be careful not to make any mistakes. There's 2 ways I can attach the Daleks to this base. Either drill some holes for the pegs, or cut the pegs off completely. So I decided to keep the pegs by painting them up first and press them onto the base, and by doing so I know where to cut. This will give me better stability than just using glue alone. Because my cuts are not 100% accurate, there's still some gaps that need filling in. but otherwise the Dalek fits nicely into his new base. And now I just need to repeat the same process with the other one. Although gaps are now filled in and are standard smooth, the second Dalek isn't going to be quite as straightforward as the first one. It's supposed to be all opened up at the front, ready to merge with a human, which is why all these pieces are separate, so it can create the appearance that the whole thing has unfolded. As you look at the finished example, this is how it's supposed to look. I, however, am not too keen on this design, so I'm just going to open the top half like in the episode titled Dalek, which means I have to modify all these pieces to fit, and this took quite a bit of trial and error. But once I filled in all the gaps, it didn't look too bad. But once that's done, I can start priming the Daleks, and that's followed up by applying a bronze base colour. The eye stalk and the lights on top are supposed to be clear, so I covered them with blue tack to prevent any paint from getting onto them, and this did the job pretty well. It's much quicker and easier to apply than using masking tape. And now I can start painting on the other details, starting off with a black mesh which goes around the head, and before I continue on with the remaining black areas, I dry brush everything in a gold colour, and this brings out all the raised highlights, plus this also contrasts very well against the bronze. I painted the weapon arms in a gunmetal colour, and then proceeded to paint all the other areas which should be in black, which include the tip of the eye stalk, the plunger and the skirt, and also not forgetting the trim where the half spheres are going to go. For the lens in the eye stalk, I painted that a pale blue. I used a little bit of black panel liner to bring out some additional details. And with that done, I permanently attached the Dalek's weapons. This brush on superglue works very well for that. I should have good control over it and it doesn't interfere with the paint. Next up is the laborious task of applying all the semispheres. While they were still on the sprue, I sprayed them gold. I figured this would be the most effective way of painting them. Some of them needed a little bit of touch-up work, but it's still quicker and easier than attaching them to the Dalek and then painting them. Off camera, I also finished assembling the open Dalek, so all that was left to do was to paint the actual creature from inside the Dalek. This involved painting the eye yellow, plus some washes and dry brushing. So once he's been put into place, it's time to seal everything in. And as per usual, I'll go for matte rather than gloss. And there we have it, this vintage kit is now complete. And I must say I'm quite pleased with the modifications I've done on the open Dalek, because I never liked the fact that the whole Dalek was empty in this particular episode when it should have been filled with machinery and components, which is why I chose only to expose the top part, like in the Dalek episode. The scenery also adds a lot to this kit, especially when it comes to taking pictures for this gallery. And it would be nice to see more model kits which come with locations for the characters, as it really does elevate everything to another level. Thank you for watching. Don't forget, if I can do it, so can you.